May your heart be your guiding key.
Hello everyone, it's me, Vivi, and welcome to another Crash Bandicoot 4 It's About Time video. Since it's been almost a month since the launch of the game, hopefully you guys had time to digest the story of the game. With that said, this is something I really wanted to get out there. I feel like I belong in the absolute minority when bringing up this topic. I love and adore Crash 4. It's the best one out of the quadrilogy. By that I mean, Crash 4 is just much more lush in content and replayability compared to, the Sane Trilogy. After all, Crash 4 is a sequel to Warped. Well, when it comes to replayability and game content, I guess you could argue, but that's not the topic for today. But yeah, compared to NST, to me personally, Crash 4 felt much bigger. Even if I love this game, even if it's my favorite, I was personally surprised by the lack of, what you can call story content. Hold up. Let me explain why I'm in the minority thinking this way. Am I wrong to say that perhaps there's some people out there who abide by the following rule, that the story of Crash Bandicoot doesn't matter, only gameplay? I mean, I could be wrong. Look, I understand that the Sane Trilogy is known for its gameplay mechanics. The story delivery was very subpar compared to what the team at Toys for Bob brought to Crash 4. But the way this game was marketed, the flashback tapes, background history about the experiments done by Cortex on Crash and Coco, or how Toys for Bob put emphasis on Coco's involvement in all of these cutscenes. Look, our minds think differently. Perhaps I was expecting too much. I can admit that. As much as I love this game, even if it's just Crash Bandicoot known for its platforming aspects, I'm not going to shy away from saying that Crash's cartoony, stretchy world of animation can bring even more to the game, if they put even more focus in it. What I guess bothered me is the lack of cutscenes especially. I felt like some sections in the game had this void. I felt like those parts needed at least one cutscene. Even the lack of character interaction, that's something I've noticed. I don't want to call it a lack of character development, because look, the majority of the story is built off from the development we got from the Sane Trilogy. The Sane Trilogy, by the way, alone, like I said before, the story content is pretty much absent if you compare it to Crash 4. What this game did is, it tried to build upon its established story we know. Crash 4 feels like the first attempt at taking the story element of Crash Bandicoot to a deeper level. From where do I begin? I do have some stuff to say. Look, first and foremost, we can all agree that the masks didn't have lots of screen time apart from, Lani Lily. But that's not what really got me concerned. It's more along the lines of reintroducing a character, just for the sake of filling a character slot. Elephant in the room is Dr. and Brio. The very first thing I told myself when I saw this scene right here, what is he doing here? Please tell me the game will explain what he's doing here. Didn't he ask Crash in the second game to collect gems in order to destroy Cortex's space station? This is a sequel to the Sane Trilogy after all. How did Cortex even accept him back in the team after what he did to his space station? Note, I don't include past iterations looking back at games post Naughty Dog era, let's say Crash Mind Over Mutant, and Brio being back with Cortex. I'm not counting that game. Crash 4 is marketed as a sequel to Warped. We're entering a new timeline, you have to keep that in mind. So the thing about Brio, in the second game he had this grudge against Cortex, and yet he's back with him just like that. The only type of reasoning, I guess, is as follows. It's not like 100% clear indication of his intentions, but looking at Tranquility Falls, during the start of the level, the first level of the hub, he for some reason wants to put Crash and Coco through a test. Okay, his quote-unquote test has a lot of hazards. He says so himself. He's basically risking the lives of our duo. And Brio has this sort of complex split personality. In Crash 2, he basically hired Ripperoo, Tiny, and the Komodo brothers to assassinate Crash, but then he changed his mind and he basically teamed up with Crash. And in Crash 4, it is apparent that he's constantly having this battle inside his head. So the way this began in Crash 4, after his betrayal in the second game, he's been mixing potions and doing his own thing, and decides to put Crash and Coco through a test. Test them to see if they're suitable to, basically destroy Cortex. That's what's being implied here. He was sent to this dimension. He feels our duo is cooperating with his test. And then you realize his brain does a 180, where he starts saying, "I always admired you." He also says, "just like the good old days," and then states, "You're my only friends." Basically what's implied here. He's testing to see if he can use Crash and Coco to make a team in order to deal with Cortex. Again. And then we get his surprise. A boss battle. So you realize how his mind is like complex? Goes from one thing to another, but then basically ruins it all. Here, why don't people take me seriously? In a nutshell, that represents the constant battle this character has with what's right or wrong. He's always seeking validation through any means necessary. I made a video in the past diving deeper into the lore of Brio. You'll probably understand his character a bit better if you watch that video. The point is, even if we have dialogue in this gameplay, people can easily lose focus of the words on screen or the lines you hear because of how this game can be challenging. You're too focused, just trying to get through the level, and then you realize, oh, I didn't understand what this character was talking about. Seeing all these beautiful animations, Brio's return, I feel could have warranted at least one cutscene explaining why he came back. Let alone the fact Cortex just accepts him back. Unless we're dealing with an alternate Brio, him talking about his past encounters with alternate Crash and Coco, even with that, the game would have given us a clear indication that we were dealing with an alternate Brio. The thing is, it doesn't seem to be the case. This Brio is the Brio we know from the second game. With that said, another example of lack of cutscenes. How did Tropy and Cortex revert back to their old selves? I really got surprised by this. We'd like to assume that Uka Uka did it, his magic. But this question, how they become adults again, it's been boggling our minds since Warped. I feel it was such a missed opportunity. I was honestly expecting an explanation for that. Speaking of Tropy, he's been plotting behind Cortex. Can't say I'm surprised. Just that evil grin on his face had red flashing lights behind him and sirens. Woo woo woo! That was to be expected. If I make a guess, a lot of us assumed so. But what's cool about Crash 4? Ultimately, Cortex wound up being the final boss still. So that was unexpected, to be honest with you. I like that. Also, I did love the causal loop paradox that they implemented. I did make a video on the whole time travel aspect of Crash 4 as well. But, there's always a but in this video. We didn't even see a glimpse of Tropy plotting behind Cortex's back. We just have this scene in Tropy's space station, and then poof, he turns his back on Cortex. Like, haha, I'm the villain now. Enter a female Tropy, don't forget about that one, who I really find interesting as a character. This scene where everyone has this sense of disgust, cringe, all their different expressions on their faces, it's funny. Looking at their expressions actually, my reaction was basically Crash.
I'm doing just fine.
Nitrous Oxide was certainly a welcomed surprise. I loved it. Who, by the way, is apparently married. But yeah, about female Tropy, it just all falls flat after the boss fight. I'm not saying the boss wasn't interesting, but it felt underwhelming. You know, like these characters quickly got tossed on the sidelines. One thing I did love is the sense of mystery. How this Tana lost her own version of Crash and Coco. Yeah, they did actually die, presumably, by the hands of female Tropy. Now about Neo Cortex, their interpretation of the character is pretty on point. If we base our facts on how the Sane Trilogy handled Cortex. Cortex started as this brutal-looking scientist, whose only goal was total world domination. Especially looking back at the pixels on the PS1, I was terrified as a kid, especially in the second game. What he did, at first, he was stealing creatures in order to form an army of commandos, with Crash being the leader. Well, that didn't happen, but you know. That already sounded evil enough. He hated Crash afterwards, because he was a failed experiment and was foiling his plans. But the first game, yeah, his goal was to get rid of Crash. Same goes for the second game, albeit using a different approach this time, to try and manipulate Crash into helping him collect crystals. Crash 2 is when Naughty Dog decided to dive a bit deeper into what type of character Cortex is, pretending to be friends. Manipulation being part of his nature. Alright, okay. Then in Warped, we saw even more of his character, how he can easily be tossed aside for Tropy. He legit was fearing Uka Uka. It's not like Naughty Dog decided to ruin the character. They were building up his character, considering how minimal the narrative was in the previous games. Like, after all, character interaction in those games were pretty bare bones compared to Crash 4. Now, what I appreciated about Cortex in this game, that character arc of his was brought upon our characters. Here, for example, how he's just tired of this endless cycle of always losing to bandicoots. They got his character right. But, still, even if he started drowning in his sorrows here, he still despises them and yet decides to quickly team up with them because Tropy turns out to be the next bad guy. That I found a bit weird, him quickly teaming up with Crash. After all, in the beginning sequence, we have him imagining beating up Crash, the puppet. I was just surprised. Later on in the game, he steals Kupunawa and backstabs everyone. That felt a bit of a, call it, safety precaution. It felt forced. Forced in a way where they tried doing something new with Cortex, teaming up with the gang. But in the end, you just ask yourselves, him teaming up with the gang, was it necessary? Only to later have him backstab everyone. Some might say, well, Vivi, in the second game, he pretended to be a good guy with Crash, only to later on backstab him. Yes, you are right about that. But as for Crash 4, it's a different scenario. He lost, hates Crash, so why would he team up with them that quickly, even if we are dealing with Tropy? For someone who wanted total world domination and who despises Crash and Coco, it felt weak for his character. The moment where he just gets sad when they call him a bad guy, that just didn't stand out too well. They tried changing him, and then, oh, safety precaution guys, let's make him evil again. Like, yeah, he is Cortex. Sure, he'll backstab anyone, but he is a character with a huge ego. I was honestly expecting him to turn his back here and absolutely refuse to weaken himself to working with bandicoots, regardless of the situation. He's despised these two for years. Like I said, I'm maybe in the minority feeling this way. The ending was alright. Laying on the sand, needing a break, he was sent there by the masks. He was tired of everyone foiling his plans. He needed some alone time. No sight of bandicoots. If anything, the bad ending in 3 kinda hinted at Cortex sometimes wanting a break. If, of course, the bad ending is anything to go by. And then, let's not forget this awkward moment. We have Cortex with the gang. And then there's Dingo Dial. I was really thinking Dingo would start resenting Cortex in this scene, like freak out or do something. After all, he was originally presumed to have been hired by Cortex. I was at least waiting for one little interaction or eye-to-eye contact. Nope, nothing, just awkward silence between the two. Neither Cortex or Dingo said anything to one another in this scene. And about present Cortex meeting past Cortex, comparing the personalities, I mean, if you think about the first game, you might go like, why is Cortex acting this way in the past? Why is he acting like Cortex in the present, where in the first game he acted more, sinister, that mad scientist? Like I said, Cortex's character was slowly starting to get built, looking at the old classic trilogy. The lesser narrative of those games made it feel like the Cortex we know is basically Cortex from Warped and Cortex in Crash 4. What I'm trying to say is I wasn't bothered by his past version, how he was interpreted, more flamboyant and more bubbly. Basically, what we saw in past Cortex is what we have in present Cortex. Perhaps some of you didn't like the idea that the past Cortex acted like the present one, because of, how we saw Cortex in the first game. But like I said, the narrative of those games were so bare bones compared to Crash 4. Like, the past games by Naughty Dog needed 3 games to establish Cortex, if you understand what I'm saying. Anywho, I loved the extra love given to the added narrative. Beautiful, stretchy, cartoony, Looney Tunes looking cutscenes. I loved seeing more focus put on Coco. The same goes for Crash's bubbly nature. Yeah, Crash goes from giving Cortex a hug to, oh, he's a bad guy. Oopsie poopsie, I forgot. That's Crash. He's unpredictable, he's gullible as well. That's part of his character. That's the thing. Crash Bandicoot was inspired by Looney Tunes. I feel the series shouldn't shy away from doing even more when it comes to the narrative. Dive even deeper, like don't be scared. Crash is known for its platforming aspects, I understand. That's how it got popular in the first place. But as the series moves forward, I mean chances of Crash 5 with time, it looks pretty high, I'd say. They shouldn't be afraid to dig even deeper into the story of our characters. Crash 4 had voids in some areas. Areas I felt could have utilized more cutscenes. This is something I said midway in the video, but I thought I would remind you guys. Look, I'm not saying the writing is bad, but it felt loose. I feel like certain parts of the game needed more weight to the characters. Long story short, how the characters felt in Crash 4, it's like moving from point A to point C, completely skipping point B. And yeah, with that said, this is it for the video, guys. Like I told you in the beginning, I love Crash 4, but I thought it was about time to at least discuss this topic a little, even if I feel like I'm in the minority. If you agree or disagree on how I discussed this topic, please feel free to share your own thoughts in the comments, alright? And yeah, I've been Vivi, and thank you for tuning in. Until next time.